that one time because people were talking really nasty about somebody, and no, don't talk nasty about anybody. And so we had to have it deleted. We don't do that. We are volunteers. We don't want to get sued. Don't do it. Believe me. It was whoa. And on behalf of Susie Spittler and Tom Beck, who tapes this production for us, I want to welcome you to the 21st Oral History Taping. It is Tuesday, June the 11th, 2013, and today we will hear from the library workers at Melton Union Schools. Our first speaker is Valerie McKay, and I will turn it over to her. Valerie.
In 1973, I was desperately looking for a job and heard about this job, and I had to call them and tell them I was late because my piece of junk car didn't work very well, and I was really worried about the effect of that on my possibilities of getting a job. I have to put these on so I can read my notes. So that was 1973, and I met with the then Superintendent Jack Williams, the primary principal, Nick Donaldson. He had kindergarten through third grade, and the elementary principal, Charlie Tomlin, and that was 4th through 6th. And the only question I really remember from my interview was, would I allow kindergartners and first graders to use the library? And I remember pausing for a long time thinking it was a trick question of some kind. Like, okay, because, I just finished my library training and we had a library full of little ones using the library, but apparently the previous librarian did not allow kindergartners and first graders to use the library because they might damage the books. How they were going to get excited about reading, I don't know. But it was also the time when picture books were really getting to be important, and there were some marvelous authors and illustrators that were just creating some wonderful books. And there was so much out there to buy, and I brought my little poster. I don't know if you can see, but this is what the library collection looked like during the early years. And when I retired, this is what the collection looked like. We added so many books, and we had just so many things for the students to love and enjoy. So that was one of my first jobs. In addition to, old libraries had card catalogs, and these are cards from the card catalog. Actually, I recognize my handwriting on these cards. But in the old days, they had to be individually typed on these cards on a manual typewriter, and Marsha's going to talk about that. Or you bought a set of them from the company that went with the book. And because each book needed a shelf card, an author card, a title card, and a subject card, needless to say, if you were typing them by hand, you didn't put much on them. The card catalog had, oh my glory, how many? A lot of drawers in it. But I know that first summer, it was divided up into authors and titles and subjects, and most children, I thought, would be lucky to be able to go through the alphabet once, much less 3 different times, and decide if what they were looking for was an author, title, subject. So I sat at home every night with 3 card catalog drawers in my lap and started interfiling them and alphabetizing them so that they were in one order instead of 3. So that was one of my entertaining things. I worked with a wonderful person. Here she is on my little thing here, Jane Morgan, who couldn't be here today, took pity on a young, enthusiastic 21-year-old librarian and really helped me learn the ropes in the school and the library. She was great, and I worked with many wonderful people. Janice Penny was over in the junior high then, and Millie Watts was in the high school. And over the years, and we've got some people here too, I worked with just wonderful people who each brought something special to the library program and had unique talents that really added to what we were doing. But every single person, always, it was about the kids, not about the stuff. They always remembered that it was children and ideas and books. Well, declining enrollment and fund cuts and things like that, we went from 2 full-time librarians, one in the primary elementary complex, one over in the high school, and a library secretary, wonderful person in the junior high, and one in the elementary, middle school, or primary complex, to one of each, and then finally there's one library in the new building. And from these, we got to computers, which was great. The media that I started out with were reel-to-reel audio tapes, which slowly went into cassette tapes, 16 millimeter movies, overhead projectors, and slide projectors. That was the extent of our wonderful media. And now, I don't know what you all have over there. You can comment about that. I know computers, whiteboards, e-readers, and just all kinds of tech. I know when I was leaving, tech was a big deal. I was always happy to call myself a librarian, because to me, librarians help get people connected to stories and ideas. And it doesn't matter what format. I mean, we don't use little scrolls rolled up anymore. We use other formats, but to me, it's always been about helping people find out the information and get delighted by the stories that they're looking for. My highlights were when I started having the middle school come in the library. I wanted to do something special for them, because I did story time for kindergarten and first grade, and that was always a highlight of my day, when I could do story time with the kids. With the middle schoolers, what I really loved to do were book talks. And because they're middle school books and you don't like to have surprises in some of those books, I read them all. And the kids were always surprised by that. But they were also comforted by that, knowing that if I recommended a book, it wasn't because I just read the inside of the book, the inside flyleaf. They would know that I'd actually read the book. I knew what it was about, and I knew it might fit them. So when I would do book talks, it was always exciting to see the students check them out. And every once in a while, somebody would come back the next day and have read overnight a book. And one young person came in and said that was the first book they ever read on their own, not that they had to. It was the first book that she'd ever read for herself, and did I have something else like it? And that's what makes your whole day, whole career worthwhile. I also had a young woman stop me in the public library one day. She had her little girl with her, and they were going into story time, and she said, I know you don't remember who I am. She said, but I used to sit up in the front row of story time, because at home people didn't read to her. And story time was something that she looked forward to every week. But because I had story time in the library, she was bringing her little girl to story time at the public library. And that has always made me cry. It's always made a special difference to me that I impacted not just her as a child, but I impacted her as a mother, and therefore her child as well. I just liked what I did. I just really enjoyed all the different age kids from 5-year-olds on up, because they each bring something different and they're at different stages in their life. And I always enjoyed connecting them with information that they wanted something to know more about, or a story that would touch them in some way. And then some of that comes off the internet or through computers, and I got involved in teaching. I have a picture here, I think. Yep, I'm teaching computer classes, how to use things so that they would be able to be independent learners and have an opportunity to find things for themselves. But I also taught keyboarding. We had this program that had a verse for each finger, like this is your QAZ finger, so quick ask Zoe. And so that was always fun. I was going through that the other day with somebody. I'm like, I just do this. I'm like, oh no, there's a verse for that. That was always fun too, helping people. And I had a wonderful 35 years working at the school and the library, and I worked with some wonderful women like Marsha Fischbach, who's going to tell some more stuff about our adventures in the library.
I agree with Val. There is nothing more rewarding than to see children for the first time appreciate the written word and all the beautiful pictures, or actually read. It's a very exciting experience, and I began in the library as a volunteer in 1979. At that time, my son was in second grade, my daughter was in kindergarten, so it was a perfect opportunity to be able to come to the school and volunteer and get to know the school and the people there. And it was a fun experience because children have always been a highlight to me in all kinds of ways, at church and in drama and different forms. So it was a pleasure to be there. It was a fun place to be. That next year, the 1980-81 school year, posting was on the board for a library clerk. At the same time, there was a posting for a middle school secretary. So I interviewed for both jobs, and Valerie hired me as the library clerk. Well, that began my career at Milton Union, which lasted for 31 years, 6 in the library, and then I moved up to central office as special education secretary, and then secretary to the superintendent. Superintendent, when I came, was Dr. Stan Imholz, and then Dr. Duchesne, Dr. Barney, and now Dr. Rammel. So I experienced many, many changes. I'm the antiquity of the group. It's amazing the change that I experienced, and of course Valerie did too, from when I began, because at that time we had a manual typewriter in the library. So, the material, that catalog cards and book cards and the pockets and, all those were typed by hand. And at that time, probably 4 like this had to go in the card catalog. And you typed, and of course you had to really type hard, and it was slow because, you couldn't get much speed when you're typing cards and making sure they're straight. And, well, the year or so after I started, the elementary had a typewriter, electric typewriter they weren't using. Well, wow, I was in heaven when I got that typewriter. And so, in fact, probably 2 years after I started, I had to have glasses, and I've had them ever since, just because of the whole visual thing of looking at these teeny little letters on things to read. after several years, and I think it was early as, well, maybe earlier than I remember, as Val said, you could purchase the cards pre-printed and the pockets, but most of the time we didn't do that. Toward the end, we did it more. Not only was that system antiquated, the machinery to print things or to, all those things were the basic things that many of you will remember as the beginning of when you were young or worked in an area where technology just wasn't here. As I never did experience technology in the library. I moved upstairs, still on the electric typewriter, and was upstairs with the electric typewriter. So the comparison between then and now, what is available to these children, is amazing. And of course, it's a wonderful, great necessity. I'm so happy that our school, and especially the new school, accommodates all those things that these kids will need as they graduate and go out into the real world. They have to compete, and even if you're in a small town, you can do your best to compete with other schools and other technologies available to people. I remember part of what I loved in the library was story time, when Val would read to the little kindergarten first graders. And I always was really excited when she got busy and had to do something else, and every once in a while I would get to read a book to the little ones. It's just such a neat thing. There's your captive audience, and they're all excited, and they all listen. It was just a great thing. And we had a little round table in the library, because then all the children had to write their name on their card to check the book out. So we as workers would go over, and as well as their teacher, and help them, get their name on the right line, and then they'd come up to the desk and they'd hand you the card, and you stamp that with a stamper and with the book, and they could take it with them. And at that age, they were allowed one book at that time. But the excitement was so great. And as Valerie indicated, as she was there, she did classes for middle school kids. And they would come to the library and sit at the tables with their teachers. And of course, that was on a whole nother level, but very attentive, very interested in what she was presenting. And that's an exciting thing to see. Now with kids on iPods and iPhones and whatever they are, that's gone. That's gone. You end up having to have things that happen right now very quickly, and but it is the way it is. It is our world, and I think at my age, that's something that I have trouble sometimes. I mean, I can do things on the computer and all that, but as far as tech savvy, oh my, no. But I worry sometimes that even with Kindles and different things, no longer are books as precious and as desired as they used to be. I was offered a Kindle, and I really like to go to the library, and I am an avid reader, and I have been most of my life. And so that in itself is a hobby, I guess you'd say, but I still enjoy having that book, turning those pages, and enjoying it that way. After I was in the library, Eileen Flum, who couldn't be here today, was hired as the library clerk when I was offered the position upstairs. And after that, Jyle Johnson came into the picture, and I will introduce Jyle.
Thank you. My name is Jyle Johnson, and I have been at the library for 13 years. And I was fortunate enough to start in the library with Valerie. She was the best person to show me the ropes, so to speak, and so many memories. I've actually worked with Valerie, and I've worked with Heather, and I've worked with Dee in the library. Eileen Flum went upstairs, and then I took her position as clerk. At the time I came to the school, the elementary and middle school was one library, and the high school was a separate library at the other building. And at the time, there was someone at the high school, a librarian, and then, like Valerie said, there was her and then a clerk at the elementary and middle school. So we were serving K-8, and we were serving it in one space. And I remember from the first day to the last day in that space, it was never a big space, but we did so much in that space. We alluded to, I think before this taping, Valerie mentioned that things got moved around. They did. Constant moving, shuffling in order to make it, maximizing our space. The middle school section, the storytime section, features, references, fiction, just whatever we could do to maximize that space. Some of the things that I remember, actually, as I'm listening to them, I've heard, Valerie's given me the story on how they used to use the cards and how she'd go home at night and sort them. So I've heard all that, but listening to her and Marsha today, I've heard way more detail. And I'm sitting here thinking, wow, how lucky I am to come after all that. Because when I came, there was already software in place in the library. So it was already one of those things where nobody was taking cards home. We were just taking a scanner and we were checking the books out, checking the books in, just like at the grocery store. It was very simple, very easy. Wow, I can't imagine what you guys, I can't imagine. So very fortunate that we had the technology. And because of the software, we were better able to serve kids. There was a system in the software where you could, kids could reserve books in the computer. So we would reserve those books, and then I remember we would stick them under the desk. But when I got there, I started a little reserve notice thing because we had that capability in the computer, and we would send rather than kids coming and saying, "Is my book here yet? Is my book here yet?" We could send notices to their homeroom teachers as soon as those books came in, which was nice because here's kids that want to read this. We want to get it in their hands. It was a nice way to keep those books moving, get them in their hands quicker, especially some of the popular series when you have so many kids waiting to read a book. So I always felt that was just a better way to get the books in the kids' hands. So that was kind of cool. Story time. I'm like Marsha. Whenever there was those few times when Valerie couldn't read, I was like, yay, I get to read. And that was always kind of fun. Gosh, I remember I learned my lesson early. Watch if you ask open-ended questions of little people, because you never know. You never know what's going to come out of their little mouths. But I know the kids love story time, but one memory that I do have is there was a little first grade. I was reading to a first grade class, and she was more one of the outspoken little ones. And I just remember after the story, and I said this a lot, did you guys enjoy that story? How was that? And she looked right at me and she goes, no, that was boring. Okay then. Luckily that was only one time that ever happened to me, God love her. But I did enjoy reading the stories, and that was great that I got that opportunity. I also had the opportunity of helping Valerie during those touch typing classes. And I was just telling Heather, who you'll meet in a minute, how I still remember those phrases. And when my kids learned to type, I kind of went through those with her. Quick ask Zoe, what stops X-rays? We could go on. But it's just that was fun too, to see some of the teaching and instruction that went on in the library. Valerie did story time. She did book talks. Loved listening to her do book talks. She did the typing instruction. She also did internet searching instruction. I remember the tree octopus that doesn't really exist. That was about internet validity. That was really memorable. Book fairs. Did nobody bring up book fairs yet? How could you guys not bring up book fairs? Oh my goodness, book fairs. I tried to put in one sentence, what book fairs? I just think they were just crazy busy. We never stopped the library. We continued to run the library, but we added the book fair to the mix. So it was just like doing more with the same amount of time, getting ready for it and having it. And it was just always so much going into it. but the kids were always so excited about it. When's the book fair? When's the book fair? When's it open? Can I come in? I remember when Valerie would set it up, we'd stick chairs there to block the entrance as if that was going to stop them. It's tomorrow, it opens tomorrow. And that's just been great because the kids, I've always loved that program. We work hard, but it's so worth it. The kids are so excited, and they get these brand new books in their hands, and it's profitable for us because we are able to take that money and buy more books to put in the library. It's just a great program all around. This year, being in the new building was the first time we had a new space to think about. And in my experience, I always knew how Valerie had set it up. So in this new building, you kind of had to rethink how are we going to design this. And it ended up being wonderful. And we had even a bigger selection for the middle school kids. And we had high school kids come and buy some books too. We had some young adult books. So it was really exciting. The kids were excited. We were excited. And it was very successful. So that's great. But book fairs. When Valerie retired, we did a couple skits for her retirement. And the one that I specifically remember was we did a book fair skit where we had this big long line of kids waiting to buy their new books. And the one little kid that comes up there with his jar of pennies dumps them onto the table. That's just awesome. God loved them. That's just wonderful. Just all their little savings to get their books. It was wonderful. Let's see, book fairs. What else do my notes do I need to tell you? There's so many things. The joke with my colleagues, all of them, Valerie, Heather, that it would be so busy sometimes in the library with so many things going on. But every time the superintendent would walk in, you could hear crickets. It was quiet. And like, oh my gosh, why don't you come in when it's really busy? And it used to be just this running joke. And finally one day I asked Dr. Ramel, I said, how come every time you come in here, it's so quiet? I promise you, it's really busy. She said, Jill, she goes, I know. She said, it's just that when I peek in the door and I see that you guys are really busy, I don't stop in. Well, shoo, if I'd known that. She didn't believe we really were busy in there. But a good busy, It's nice when it's buzzing. And even though we had middle school and elementary together, there were those neat moments when a middle school student would, help the younger one, or no, go ahead, you can step up ahead of me, or the little ones would just be in all of the bigger ones. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of neat to see older kids reading. When I get older, I'm still going to read. In the new building, it's a K-12, so we have 13 grade levels in the new building, and boy, lots of traffic in and out. I love that we have all of our books in one space. In the past, if a student needed a book from the other building, we have to wait until one person could bring it over, so they'd have to wait a day or so. But now, I just remember the feeling this year when a student needed a book and I could just walk to the other side and get them a book in about 30 seconds. So that's great. The economy's there. If a high school student wants a nonfiction book in this section, or a high school student needs a young adult book in the other middle school section, we could really very easily accommodate that. So that's been really cool. I also, another moment in the new building, I remember when the first middle school class came into the library. Because at the old building, we had a very small section called the doghouse, where it was the young adult section, and it was rather small, and you could not get an entire class in that section. And so when the first full middle school class came to the library and they came to their space, and there was plenty of room for them all, I just remember thinking that was so wonderful. For me, that was just great. I'm like, stay, don't feel crowded, browse, enjoy yourself. So that was really neat. We have a courtyard off the library in the new building, and we've had teachers take advantage of that. They've gone out and they have let their kids during their library time go out and sit out there on the bench area, the concrete bench area, and read. I think Dee even did a story week when the weather was nice this spring. She took the younger kids out there to do a story time. Some teachers have done other things out there where they're talking, instructing. It's just nice to see that section being used. There was one particular student in the high school who took to using the courtyard and to read. And I think it's just one of the things where it was really a good thing for him, a place to go and a place to read, and it was a very positive experience. And he came a lot, and that was neat to see too, what it does for a class and what it does for one. So that was neat. Let's see. Have I talked too long? Can I keep talking more? Let's see what else I can tell you. The technology, in the library has 2 smart boards, one on the elementary section and one on the older kids section. So teachers, students, whatever, they can do instruction. Next year, D is actually going to be doing some library skills instruction. So the kids will be coming as a class, so there'll be actual instruction going on that side of the library. So that's exciting. Let's see. Technology, like I said, thank goodness I came when I did. It was kind of neat too when we added more card catalog stations for the kids as we went along, because they took ownership of that, and they to see them using that and helping to in their own searches and things, making those tools available to the kids. That was good. Oh, I made a note about this. You talk about those little cards. They're still in some of the books, because we do have some books that are that old. So the kids will come up and they'll say, Mrs. Johnson, I found this in there. I'm like, oh yeah, that's the way they used to catalog that. We can put it in recycle. And they're like, can I keep it as a bookmark? And I just think that's just so sweet. So some of your cards are still in circulation as bookmarks. I still read books. I do not have a Kindle yet. I'm probably the transition group. I still like to flip through the pages of my books. Like Marsha said, I know there's the convenience. I see it and I know what it is, but I hope we don't ever lose that. I'm still hoping that we never lose that feel, that tactile feel of that book in your hands. When you see like the younger ones, like you said, who this is the only they don't go to the public library. This is the only book that they get each week, and they just some of them just hold that book like it's sometimes you have to get them to try to close the book because you got to walk down the hall safely. It's just so special to them. So kudos to you, Valerie, for saying yes, our kindergarten and first graders will come and get books, because oh my goodness. Now that's not to say that they don't come back with interesting things on them. So I will say, when you talk about your highlights of your job, my low light would probably be the books that maybe come back wet or with some substance on them that's yet undefined. But they are used and loved, so it's definitely worth it. Let's see. I hate to repeat what they said, but I love to repeat what they said. If I had to pick the one thing about this job that is the highlight of this job, it's the moment when you take that reluctant reader, or the one who's coming in just to get a book, to do that monthly report. And you bug them a little. What do you like? What are you interested in? And you, based on what they tell you, you direct them to a book, and they go home with that book, and you're hoping they're going to read it, and they come back and they absolutely loved the book. Or the ones I've heard this more than once, they come in like, Mrs. Johnson, I read this in 2 days, and you're like, this is great. What else do you have? That is by far what makes this worthwhile for me. My background is not education. My background is marketing. So I'd like to think I've taken some of that marketing to use in the library with book fairs and features of book months and things. But that thing, those moments, that is most definitely the highlight of being here. So it's been I can't believe it's been 13 years, but we're still trucking, so it's wonderful. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Heather Galentine.
I am Heather Galentine, and I was a teacher at the high school around the time that I heard some rumors that Mrs. McKay might be retiring. And I wasn't quite finished with my library degree, but there's ways you can get around that. So when I interviewed, I was very, very excited that I would have the opportunity to work in our school libraries, and I thought what a privilege it would be to take over for Mrs. McKay, because even when I was in elementary school, Mrs. McKay was the librarian, and I just remember thinking that she was awesome. She had the best job in the world. And so was, like I said, very privileged. What an honor that I was to be her replacement as the district librarian when she retired. But I felt like I already had some training, because I was telling her, I remember in 4th or 5th grade, we could take recess time or get out of class or for something, and we could go down to the library and we could learn how to check in, check out books, with the cards in the pockets and stand at the desk, because there's a little bit of a power trip that comes with standing behind the library desk. And learning how to shelve books and what went where and how those were all taken care of. So I felt like I had a good background going into this job. But that first year, Jill was always, now this is how we've done things, or, this is how it's worked, and I'm like, okay. I mean, that whole enthusiastic piece that, I'm going to change the world one book and one child at a time. And before the library, I had been a 7 through 12 English teacher for 16 years. So my background was big kids. And I remember the first time a kindergarten class was about to come in, scared to death. I'm like, what do I do with these little people? They're like little and they're full of energy, and how apprehensive I was. But after, the first experience was just in love. One of the things I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to share this, there are just some things in the library that only people who have worked in the library can appreciate. That you would tell certain stories to people and they were like, okay, but if you tell somebody from the library, they're like, oh, it's hilarious. I know what you're going through. And I remember the first time a student brought in a damaged book. As Jill said, they brought in this wet book. And I don't know what to do with damaged books. So I turned to Jill and asked her, and she said, well, I don't smell wet books. She said, Valerie sometimes smells wet books. You might want to smell a wet book, but I will not smell a wet book. Because, there are some things we probably just don't want to know. But on the, obviously some books you can't save, but we did have a repair bin. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate, that whole idea that I almost felt like I was a book surgeon, and we can save this book with just the right amount of glue and the right kind of tape. We can save this book for one more reader. And it was just nice to be able to go back there and tackle the bin and have some downtime and kind of re-energize and be able to put that back on the shelf for another student to enjoy. And that used to bother me about books in the shape they were in, because everybody likes to be the first one to read it, but then I think if you look at a book that's been damaged or that it's not in the best shape, it's because that book was loved, that book was passed on and stories were shared, and that was just wonderful. Another thing that with sharing with Storytime that just one of my memories, the first time sitting in the rocker sharing and having a student reach out and touch my leg or like pet my pant leg. And I'm thinking, why are they doing that? And, just some things that they do, or, looking at children who have their fingers in their nose, and you're thinking, why aren't they mesmerized by this story? I'm such a fabulous storyteller, and they're looking around, and they're wiping the carpet, and just doing other things. But that thought that when you get done with that story, that the children that pop up and say, can I have that book? Can I have that book? And I remember one time looking at a first grader and saying, no, but we can put this book on reserve. And that's not something you share with 6-year-olds, because all 27 kids in that class wanted to be on the wait list for that book. But to introduce them to characters and stories and different illustrators, and when they would come in and they'd say, can I have another book by this author? Can I have another one? Boys that devour the dinosaur section, and they get through all the books, and what do I do now? And why don't we read about sharks? Or to try to get something that will keep their interest and their excitement level up. I think just that whole idea of connecting with kids and connecting books and just sharing stories, and that that middle schooler that comes in and thinks that he's too cool or she's too cool. And I remember had a high schooler. They had, of course, some of those kids only come when they have to get something for a book project or a book report, and having this kid look at me, big lineman football player that comes in, he's like, I got to get a book. And I said, well, what are you interested in? And I don't read. Well, I didn't ask you what you read. I'm asking you what you're interested in, to try to make that connection and try to give them something. I said, I don't read. I don't like books, and trying to find something. Okay, I know you play football. How about we try one of these? And finding that book, you know, and when they'd come back, and the ones that show the excitement are the ones that come back that can, because they're still too cool and like, well, I didn't hate it. You know, that if I had to read something, it was okay. But knowing that translated into, you know, you found something and I liked it, and I may read a book again sometime is always just so exciting. So I think that's everything that I had. Like I said, that space is just a space that's different than any other, and to be able to make those connections with kids, and what a privilege that is, you know, that every day when you come, it's a different day. You know, you may read that same story to 5 different groups of kids, but it's going to be 5 different experiences. And you know, in the open-ended questions, you never do that. To kind of finish my own individual piece, probably my first or second year in the library, I'm not sure which one, a book, it was called Big Chickens, came out, and I absolutely fell in love with this book. It was a picture book, and it's about these 5 chickens, and they're chickens. They're afraid of everything, and they venture out of their coop, and they have these big adventures, and they're afraid of everything. And then they go through these situations, and they figure out that there's really not that much to be afraid of, and that they can do this together, and they have all these adventures. And it's just done with just the lyrical language is just, there's a lot of alliteration and just fun play with rhyming words. And I had shared these with the first graders, and they had loved it. And I thought, you know what, I think I can do this with the kindergartners. So I had shared it the next week with kindergarten class, and I got done. I was so excited about this story. And I had one little girl who sat in the front. She raised her hand, and she said, Mrs. Galentine, did you know that you're dressed like the big white chicken? And I thought, what is she talking about? And I looked at the cover of the book, and the big white chicken had on a lavender polka-dotted dress. And that day, I had on a lavender polka-dotted sweater. And I thought, yes, I do believe I am. Isn't that interesting? And so, of course, I run to Jill and say, look at this, I'm dressed like the big white chicken. So that, I think, is kind of my legacy. I say that I probably should have that sweater framed and retired and like hung up on the wall like a professional athlete's jersey. But, you know, just things that little kids are amazing, and making those connections and having those experiences, I think, are just as amazing. So.
One other thing I was thinking of when other people got to speak, we talked about checking out books with the kids that when we still had the cards to sign and everything. And you were talking about reserving books.
Yes.
Well, the interesting thing with ours was if you wanted to reserve a book, then you wrote your name or we wrote your name and paper clipped it to the card, because when the book came back, we had to insert the card, which we had, hundreds filed in this big drawer in alphabetical order. And then we would take that off, and then we'd either write a note, send it to the classroom, or when the child came in the next time, give that book to them. But, it's such a different procedure. And then when you're not in that situation for all those years, and then you hear the next generation, the next phase, it's exciting. It's really neat, and how things, just progress and get better, and we can all have our own memories of our own experiences. So that's great.
Well, the other fun thing that you had to do was type out the overdue list by hand.
Oh, I forgot that.
You have to go one of us would take the cards home at night and organize them by homeroom numbers, and then in the morning you would
First thing
in the morning, so you have to sit at that typewriter and type out the overdue list to send down to the classroom.
That's right.
Where now Jill's over.
I gotta give you a sympathy card, because oh my gosh, sometimes that thing's like 20 pages long, and you have to
So
type
now
it
the
out.
computer's just spitting it out in 2 seconds.
That's right.
But speaking of the computer, I remember spending all of Thanksgiving and through Christmas break the 1 year at home with the little card drawers
entering.
and the CD and my big Apple IIGS computer and changing all the paper records
Yes.
manually one by one into electronic ones. And my children did not see me through the end of November through Christmas break because I was in my little room doing it and doing it and doing
I
it.
just can imagine.
So that because I thought automating it was a good idea.
It really was. You just didn't get to read as much as we
I
did.
was very motivated to make it happen.
Oh, I'm glad you
So-
did. And that was optional, right? I mean, at the time, you were the one probably who.
I was pushing
Pushed
it, and
for
I
it.
gathered money, and I wrote a
Thank
grant,
goodness.
and I did as much as possible so that we could
Move
get
forward.
automated and
That's
move
right.
forward. Because, I mean, the clerk, secretary, literally was spending much of the day at a typewriter, not helping children. And my focus has always been the children and what can we do for them. And I wanted to get past the manual stuff and get to the fun stuff,
Yeah.
which is kids. And the same thing with technology for kids. What can we do to help kids have access to what they need to have access to? So yeah, I was very committed.
And we and all the future generations, thank you.
Remember the first time we did inventory, that was quite an experience because again, I had never been on that side of it, and Jill's like, well, this is what we've done, and I believe the first year, Valerie even came in to help get, read shelves and get everything in order before we tackled, and we would hook the scanner up to a laptop and put it on a cart with an extension cord and buzz it around the library, and I think it was after the first year, I moved some money around and figured out how we could buy wireless scanners, and we bought 2. And I remember, this is the silliest thing, again, when I said that if you've never worked in a library, there are certain things you can't appreciate. But so I got these 2 wireless scanners, and we're like, well, how far do they reach? So the base sat under the desk, under the circ desk, and I took one into the far corners of the library and squatted down on the floor in front of the children's, in the picture book section, and this is very sad. I even went across the hallway into the restroom, and just to see if it of course it did, but how exciting that was that we didn't have to lug this extension cord and worry about our batteries, and
wires getting in the way. And
And 4 of these.
we're not going to get sipping from this end.
That's our experience.
Balancing in your hand
Yeah.
while you're pulling a
Check
book
every
open.
card. That's
Or
right.
have
my
2
gosh.
of you
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
One's going, yep, and the other one's pulling it down and doing the number. Do inventory that way of 10 or 15
Oh
years.
my gosh.
I'm
And
trying to think how,
automation's
Again, automation was good.
how
Thank
long
you
that
so
took. I can't
much.
even remember. It was like a week or
we had volunteers.
Oh, it was
awful.
terrible.
And those easy books with multiple things that were in order by the shelf order, so you had to lay them all over the floor and find the right.
Oh,
Oh, it was.
Of course, we thought it was normal.
That's
Well,
just what
maybe
you
not
did.
normal, but
It was what.
it was what we had.
Which was, why I worked so hard to automate.
Well, when you went
That's
from the
fun.
old software, just little things even, when the software upgrades, because when you went from the old software, you could do inventory, but only one person could do inventory, and you couldn't scan books,
You couldn't check in and out.
check in and out if you were doing inventory in that section of the library. So it was, we were fine, thinking, hey, it's automated, but it was restrictive. When you purchased the newer version, the newer software, then you were able to have as many people as you wanted on the inventory, and it didn't affect the check-in, check-out. So you could still do your day-to-day, and the inventory could still be going on here. Over when the high school library, they could do inventory there and here, and that was great.
And now you can check the card catalog from anywhere in the building and at home. You can have online access, and so.
Yep, to the library
it's-
catalog.
It's very nice.
It is very nice.
Just accessibility. It's always about getting kids. And we were talking about being sad that kids aren't reading books, but the hardest part is picture books. Picture books are movable art. The artist has a certain sense of when the page turns,
what's going to be revealed. And some of those books are like, and what happens next? And you turn the page, you go, it's funny, you know. Or some of them have cutouts, and you know,
That's
you
true.
can't get that on a Kindle. I mean,
Right.
you miss something. You really do have to have that art form in your hand to enjoy.
That's a
It's
good
just
point.
something
That
different,
is a good
something
point.
special. But I never forget the parents would come by and they'd say, I don't know what it is when we go to the public library. I have to find a book about, you know, this by this certain author. You know, and I started going to the public library and they're going, you know, what's going on over there? You know, well, we're doing author and illustrator studies, you know. And so the it had an effect on the public library because all of a sudden the kids weren't just browsing and picking a pretty book off. They wanted a certain one by a certain person, you know. And some of the wonderful first grade teachers there also do author and illustrator studies, and the kids really get a sense of a real in-depth view of something. And you know, and again, they're going off to the public library, and if you got that new one, you know,
Yeah.
and they want it, you know. Hey, I've heard that so-and-so has a new one out, you know, when are you going to get it?
See, you say that, and that makes me think even of our middle school kids. I mean, there's just so many levels of that relationship
Right.
with your students because, you know, when they come in and like, hey, did you know such and such is coming out in October? And we don't know it yet. They know before I know, or, you know, the librarian knows. So it's like, oh, well, then we're putting that on our wish list to order. You know, you have this, oh, back and forth. It's pretty cool.
That's
I
awesome.
think one of the neat things that experienced, and we talk about our reluctant readers, and then our kids that love books, and people who want to read and want to feel that. The second year that I was in the library, our MH teacher asked if she could bring her students, and those are students with very, very limited cognitive abilities and skills, and a few of them were mute for, they don't speak and they don't communicate in that way. And I remember them coming and sitting on the floor with those kids and just going through books and looking at pictures and having them make animal sounds, or not even worrying about the text, but looking at the pages and having that experience with them. And one little boy loved Eric Carle and his books, but it depended on kind of his mood that day, which one. One day he might like to look at the grouchy ladybug, but there might be another day when that was just not going to happen because we needed to read Brown Bear, or something like that. So, it's everybody, that's touched by the artwork or the words or the books, or, walking over. We had one little girl that she would get the same book every time she came into the library. And before she came in, there would be times when we would hide. We had like 3 copies of the book and we would hide it so she could get something different because she was not checking that book out this week. And but she would go and where is it? Well, it's not here today. It's all checked out.
Let's
But let's choose
wonderful
something
book.
else and open your, expand your world. So
Another
this-
thing I used to enjoy is remember when the high school class would come over and the home ec class would come
Oh,
over
yes.
and I'd talk about, it was Jeannie,
Jutras?
yeah,
Yes.
Jeannie Jutras.
Yes.
Would bring them over, and I would teach them what was age appropriate, like for babysitting or young parents, what would be appropriate. And we would go over to the picture book section, of course, and I would talk to them about the very beginning picture books and why it is we use picture books with little ones in the first place. That it's all about words and language and interactions and just starting to manipulate something. And I just always enjoyed that, working with the young adults and looking and preparing them for being parents possibly, or doing the babysitting, working with little ones, so they have a little bit better idea of why we use picture books in the first place, and how it affects the development and the language development and preparation for reading, which is really what it's all about, is making sure that language is there, so that when they start picking up the printed word, they already have all those words in their head. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, I remember my daughter, the first time we passed by a restaurant. She looked at this big long word up there and she said, "Huh, Mom, that says Ponderosa." Because she, and she was like 4 or something like that. She really wasn't reading. My children didn't read until they were much older. They had stories in their heads and they would use a lot of words in their own storytelling. But to pick somebody else's story up wasn't what they were doing yet. But, it was all of a sudden, da-da, that was a word she knew, and all of a sudden she recognized, that's a big long word and I bet I know what it is. And that's what that preparation with the students, the children was about, is so that they would be able to get started.
Your point about like when they're ready, I mean, that's so different. I mean, everybody's different. So the idea that you're constantly engaging them so that at some point it's going to click, so you always want to be there to offer that, that inspiration or whatever.
Well, we sure enjoy it, huh?
Yes. Yeah, if you want to feel like you're doing something good, yes.
Right.
You definitely feel like you're
Right.
doing something good.
Do you remember any of the students having, I know this one girl loved this one book, but is there a particular book that was, that everybody loved, a story?
I'm thinking of the Captain Underpants.
Captain Underpants.
Captain Underpants.
Oh,
Okay.
My first year in the library,
Jeez.
Captain Underpants was like this thorn in my side. The kids loved Captain Underpants, and if you've ever seen one, they're quite a unique series of stories, and I think you either appreciate them or maybe not so much. And I remember, especially third grade, lower level reading some, and they would always, returning one, picking up another, and it just, kids, are there any Captain Underpants back behind the desk? Are there any Captain Underpants? I remember one day I was like, we have no underpants. There are no underpants behind the desk. And just realizing what had transpired, but I did come around because I realized how many of those lower level readers would find that, and once they had read all the Captain Underpants, then they needed something else, and so I thought that was always a real opportunity to then say, you've mastered this, let's go on to something else.
That's the same as many of those series, they'd work their way through every single book in the series, and then they'd start on another series, which was okay because they were still reading, they were still progressing, and we're still engaging them. But yeah.
So after my little meltdown, we did, have a little bit different outlook and, would help kids, and always made sure we had copies if something was damaged or, we made sure those were replaced. For middle school kids, The Diary of a Wimpy Kid, as soon as those started coming out, and we did keep those in our middle school section because we thought it's such a middle school experience. Right. And, we had the younger ones and say, well, I can read that high. Or, well, that's great, but, this is kind of an experience for our middle schoolers, and we're reserving it for them. But it was always exciting, too, when, a new one was coming out, and whether it was pre-ordered or, could grab that book and have it on the day it came out, and, those kids that were on the wait list and could have that book in their hands. Lots of fantasy. Valerie had built a wonderful collection of young adult fantasy. And so that not being my favorite genre, I would always, when I would recommend those things to kids, and that's what part of it, I think if you're excited about it, they're going to be excited about it. Like I said, that fantasy's not my passion, but based on my son is a big fantasy reader, and what Valerie had supplied and what we knew about the authors and what Jill could, we could share those with kids, and they would never know that we didn't read those. But the same thing with realistic fiction. If you had this kid comes in and he's, we could tell he was a skater, and be able to pull out a book about it, where a main character was a skateboard fanatic, or, that kids who have had, some rough life situations, and you could pick up a book and say, I think you might be able to connect with this main character, and or give them something that's totally out of their life experience, and they realize kind of what else is out there.
Too, I'm thinking of the kids who do that too, when the whole class is in there, and you have those kids going, "Oh, read this, this is a good one. Do this, do this."
So exciting.
They're the ones. It's word of mouth from the kids. I see that all the time. Oh, you got to read this. It's really good. Because I know me, unlike Valerie, I can never say I've read every book in the library. So, but to be able to say, I know I've not read these, but they're really popular, although obviously it sounds better coming from a fellow student, but that's always been what I've done. And like you said, it's been really, it works.
What
And you
about
say,
Harry Potter? Do they still like Harry Potter?
oh my gosh, yes.
Do they?
They still do, yeah. Actually,
Whether they can read it or not.
or not.
that's-
I think, yeah, they still do. I think this year we had one of the elementary grades read aloud the first one.
Oh, really?
So then they all jumped in there, and so that's where like there's copies of it in the high school section too, believe it or not. And so we were pulling some from there to fill that need. Another convenience of having everything in one space. But oh yeah, there's some things that are timeless, right? Won't Eric Carle be timeless? I don't know.
Yeah. Marie Sendek's gone, but Where the Wild Things Are
Yeah.
will never goes. So.
And it's like the excitement of that it was then, and then you have this new group that's never heard of it, and then you create that excitement again, and you just keep recreating it for the next generation. That's pretty cool too.
It was neat to watch. In the old building, there was like the K1-2 section, and then there was 3, 4, 5, and then there was 6, 7, 8. And to watch the kids when they would transition from one section to the other. I remember the first time that I did orientation with the third graders, because as first kindergarten first, they could have one book. When you're in second grade, you could get 2. And those second graders, you could say, oh, double the fun, and they'd get so excited. And then when they moved to third grade, they could move into the chapter books and the nonfiction wall. And I remember just doing that orientation and them being like in awe that the big books were there and they could go back in, and to watch as they looked for the Harry Potter, they would find the biggest, thickest book that they could find, and it may be nowhere near their reading level, but my gosh, I'm taking home 2 500-page books, and I'm going to lug them home every day.
Oh my gosh.
They go to the back wall and get History of the World.
It doesn't fit in their book bag.
So.
Or when they moved into the middle school section, as 6th graders, and you did the orientation, and you talked about not necessarily the reading level, but the content of those books. And if you open this book and you see something that is not appropriate for you, now is your time to be, kind of police yourselves. And I always tease them. I said, now that these are choices that you're making. So you may not check this out and then go home and mom says, ooh, I don't know. And you say, oh, Mrs. Galentine said I had to read that one. That I said, with this new independence, there's some responsibility. But, that would be funny where they would be, back in that little tiny section. They're all on top of each other and, bending over and reaching up top and look what this one is and have you seen this one? And just that
It was
sharing.
a challenge when the middle school library came into the same space, but we wanted to give them their own space, so that they felt like they still had something. It's like, oh no, we went back to the elementary again. But 2, because some of the materials were appropriate only for middle school.
Sure.
And even them, a 6th grader and an 8th grader are really very different. And that's where the choice came in. And remember, you and your parents, what is right for you might not be what's right for somebody else. So you have to make a good choice.
Right.
That's true.
Student workers. Oh.
Student workers
Student
were
workers.
always wonderful.
They
One,
were.
they helped us, but 2, it helped them. I started out as a library worker too, down in Eglin Air Force Base, Florida.
Funny.
I
Oh
was
my gosh.
was a library worker. Yep. And for them, lots of times it really meant a lot to them to be able to
It
work
did,
in the
I
library.
agree with that, and on a personal level, as well as the learning about it and being excited to do it, you really got close to a lot of those workers in different ways, because they were always anxious to have someone to talk to, and plus a big help in whatever you ask them to do.
Yeah, our student
Jill-
workers and our student workers and our adult volunteers, all of those people have just been and continue to be just tremendous because we could not do what we do without them. You know, you train them to work at the desk so you can go help someone find that book who's a reluctant reader. I mean, you're available because of all that help, and some of them may not be the one, you know, the top of the class. You know, they might even need us more than the other way around. But you were doing good there too, and that's pretty cool. So yeah, they've been great.
And Jill put
You were-
them through a pretty intensive training program.
Boot camp.
And it was
I
always
do.
funny. Well, when they would come in, and of course they think the first thing they're going to do is jump behind the desk. And she put them through boot camp because you had to learn how to do the floor before you could step behind the desk. But it was, you know, there was a sense of pride, I think, with those kids too when they would come in and she'd say, "Okay, I think I'm going to start training you on the desk," and they'd pick up the scanner. Okay, you know that I get to, like I said, because there is a sense of power behind that desk, you know.
There still is, yeah.
But to watch those middle schoolers interact, you know, and be so patient and kind to those kindergarten and first grade and second grade kids, and you know, they look up to them as, you know, a great influence in the library.
It's
Definitely.
such an opportunity for them to succeed sometimes where maybe school's just really,
Right.
schoolwork's not
Their
their
thing.
thing.
Right.
But they can be successful at this and do a good job.
That's
And
true.
as adults, that's what's gonna matter too. Can they be successful and do a good job?
Right, exactly.
But yeah, we've had some wonderful library workers, as you said, students and adults. We've had some great people. And some get hired
That's
too.
right.
And some make it a career.
Yes, yes, they do.
Some make a career of it too and have a good time. Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much. It's been very interesting, and we sure have loved hearing about the library of Mount Union Schools, so thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, thank you.